actually realized I didn't change the notes on Twitch, but it'll be okay. That's where I'm going to tighten up. I didn't post a flyer because I was like, no, we're probably gonna end up doing this early.
That's good planning. I'm live if you're live. We can go.
I'm live to. Are
Okay.
you ready?
Yeah, yeah. Send it.
Yeah. So you want me to start it off? I guess today,
Please.
ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another show. We are here to build on something that's interesting. I'm gonna be very particular with my words, especially on this one, on how we talk about certain things. But I do have a way of approaching it that's separate from certain things. So we want to talk about rituals and we want to talk about initiations. We want to talk about them in a lens of how integrating into society is important. So last time we talked about knowing yourself, but once you know yourself, how does that self integrate into social structures and what's that process like on a psychological level and what processes have humanity instituted into community to make those things easier. So what we're talking about here is like rites of passage into your tribe or rites of passage into your friend group or even like you think about football teams, military, whatever it is, these things that kind of allow us to be no longer a child. And we one have some idea of self usually when you come through these processes. And two, you have a better understanding of the social norms within the community that you're integrated into so that you can properly be a part of the society that you're a part of, that you are growing into, for lack of a better time.
Absolutely. Yeah, the way I like to frame it, we want to try to talk about rituals, initiations, ceremonies, why these are things that human beings have done and still do today. Why are they important? What use do they have for us in our increasingly secular, less mythologically oriented, less religious world? And a lot of what I will bring to the conversation today comes from a historian of religion. His name is Mircea Eliade, and one of his books that I'll be drawing from is called The Sacred and the Profane. And so he makes the distinction between these two modes of being. One is the sacred mode, and the other is the profane world or profane mode, and they're opposite sides of the same spectrum. But basically, one of the things that he argues is that we all need a reference point for meaning. Meaning can be defined as ways to act in the world. We're always trying to figure out what to do, how to look at the world, how to act in it. And there are some, let's say, beliefs that are more fundamental that enable us to extract meaning from the world. So what's an example of that? Let's say you've been married for 30 years. How you act in the present is predicated largely on how you think the past is organized, and it's also predicated on your anticipations of the future, your future plans. And so in the realm of your marriage, one belief that you have is that your spouse is faithful to you. You believe that you've been married to this person, you've gone through ups and downs, you're tied together financially, maybe you have kids, you've sacrificed for each other because you are both faithful to each other. And that also, that belief orients, like I said, how you act now, and it orients your expectations for the future. But you could just imagine if you found out the next day that your wife, let's say, was having an affair with you and that's been going on for 10 years, you can just imagine how that shatters your experience of the world such that you lose meaning, which is so weird how that happens. It's interesting how our assumptions and our beliefs of the world play a large part in how we know how to act and how we know who we are and how we know who other people are. And that's just an example of what I would call a sacred belief. It's a belief that if it were to be challenged or destroyed, takes away from all other, let's say, more surface level beliefs that help you figure out how to act in the world. And maybe we can go from the idea of something being sacred into sacred rituals and why, to your point, we still undergo sacred rituals. You can think about like some of the examples you gave up or you just gave, and um, before we got started, we talked about getting initiated into a fraternity or joining the military, or I would even consider marriage ceremonies as forms of rituals. Why we still have these, what I would call sacred patterns of interaction or rituals, is that they prepare us to change how we look at the world because we're transitioning from one mode of meaning construction into another mode of meaning construction. I'll pause there to see if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, and so what you're talking about is very very important. I was talking with a partner of mine, Tony, recently about this idea of how within life you're constantly going through many ego deaths. And what are these ego deaths? These are the transitioning from you having one kind of understanding and then having an experience that breaks that. And now you have to either grow the span or the width that you understand this thing at, or completely rebuild your understanding of it. And that correlates into initiations because you think about it this way: when you are initiated into a certain group or mindset, you are accepting that story. And that's one of the big things about it. So the three forms, whatever, of the three steps of initiation that I came to when I did a little research on this was separation, liminality, and incorporation. So first, you're separated from what you know. You're limited on what you're able to experience in order for you to see the world in a certain perspective. And then you're incorporated into the world with that perspective and how to move with such. And so when you really look at it from that perspective, what you're really saying is that, for instance, if you're married and something happens in your marriage that breaks your understanding or that trust of that, you're now initiated into the reality that marriage isn't always sacred. Everybody doesn't hold marriage to that same reverence. So some people might value marriage differently and aren't always gonna value that relationship or that commitment that they made. They may not always honor it. And so the reality, there's opportunity there for you to stick to the reality that no one honors marriage, or that some people don't honor marriage, and that becomes the initiation into which reality are you accepting. Because once you make that decision, you now have to build your reality around that ideal until it's re-questioned again. And so they're constantly going through these ego deaths and these restructurings, but there are certain ways for you to choose. Hey, for initiation of rituals, if I choose to join a social group, I'm choosing to adopt their story. So that's a choice one. And then you have experiential ones where you're forced to do it based off of experience. Then I'll stop there to kind of build from on that.
I think if I understand, you might be using the terms ritual and initiation a little more general than I am. So are you using ego death and initiation relatively synonymously?
So the ego death forces you into an initiation. So because once your idea of self is broken, you now have to choose a new idea of self. And then that choosing that new idea of self, you're initiated into that story.
Okay, okay, I got you. I think in my mind that makes sense where essentially anytime you are what challenged by something new that you haven't encountered before that's not a part of your previous knowledge structure, in order for you to generate the new knowledge to account for that anomalous structure or anomalous pattern, whatever it is, you have to go through an initiation. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you have to choose to integrate a new self.
Okay.
You can choose to ignore it. You can choose to deny it as fact. That's also an option. But in order to grow with that knowledge and use it moving forward, you have to accept it into your understanding.
Right. Okay. And this is also why initiation, I think, is part of the hero's journey.
Definitely, it's the
Okay.
first part of it because he has to choose to go on the journey. He's chosen most of the time, but you have to choose to partake in the journey. You have to choose to actually, like, there are times, even when the journey to the West, where they stop kind of going on the journey. And then there's like a period of things not working out and getting weird because they're not doing or going the way that they need to be going. And there's that phase of it as well. Like, there's the denial of the initiation or the rejection of the journey as well.
Okay. Okay. So now I'm making a distinction in my mind. There are psychological rituals and initiations, and then there are social rituals and initiations. But in some sense, they serve the same purpose. It's the same pattern. But when it comes to the latter category of, let's say, social rituals, again, an example that comes to mind for me is going through boot camp to join the military. You're first a civilian where you look at the world a certain way and you have embodied certain patterns of behavior. In order for you to transition into this different world, you have to go through those steps that you mentioned where there's a breaking down, there's ego deaths, there's you have to retool your past knowledge so that way it can be reconfigured towards this new end that society has deemed is useful or is good. And then eventually over time you can stand, let's say, outside of yourself and look at yourself and see, well, there is this military component of my personality, but I still have these elements of me from before I joined, and you are constantly going through this dynamic of integrating, disintegrating, and reintegrating these components of you. But the initiation phases, again, in the social realm, are helpful because why are they helpful? It's they're helpful because you get to communicate a lot of implicit information that can't be communicated explicitly. How about that? How about we have to be surrounded by symbols and ceremonies and enact these rituals? Again, in the example of boot camp, you have to be forced to adhere to a disciplined structure and a set schedule, and you have to be, I would say, down to the level of your nervous system. You are getting retooled to learn this new personality, this new way of being, and it's you can't just tell people to do that. It's like something you have to act out, I suppose, and I guess that's the usefulness of having initiation ceremonies and rituals.
Yeah, I mean, so let's think about it this way. So there's this aspect of building out. In order for a person to grow, first you need to remove what's there. So for me, I always talk about the churning or the refining of the self. And what I'm also thinking about is that I just even psychologically, for what they say, that in order to build a new habit, you need 30 to 90 days to build a new habit or something of that nature. And so when you understand that, you're like, okay, so the boot camp or the whatever initiation it may be, even just your friends not really telling you everything for the first couple of times that you hang out and seeing how you react to certain things. Like some people be like, "Oh, well, if you ain't never been drunk around me, I can't trust you. Because if you get drunk and you tell my business, then I don't want to tell you anything." Like there's these certain rituals that come a part of being integrated into social things, and they're doing two things. One, they're stripping away your old self. You're doing something new long enough for you to understand what's going on. And two, with the military or different things, you're learning the language. How do we communicate? What are the signs and the symbols that we use so that you notice what's going on and what everybody's saying and how to communicate within the group? That's the second part of it. So once you strip away everything, you then have to figure out, well, how does this group talk? What's the language here? What are the rules? What's the history? Why does this mean something to these people that are involved in this? Because that's what you tie to. You tie to that story. The story about the group is what you learn once you've removed yourself from the mixture. And then once you understand that story and you understand and you once you remove yourself from your old self, you understand the story of the new self, you then have to figure out, well, how do I incorporate into this new thing? What am I with this story? How do I fit into the story first? And how do I contribute to the continuation of this story of this group and what are their goals and missions and how do I adapt myself to that to be useful in this space. And so like that's such a deep thing because you think about how often you really have to know who you are, then be able to kind of like remove yourself from that to learn what the world is, and then learn how to integrate yourself into the world. And that's why like rites of passage in certain tribes are so important because it's like first I need you to remove I need you to know who you are, and then once you think you know who you are, I'm gonna remove all of that so you get in the use in the habit of life, making sure that you have to make those changes because you have to make changes in life. You have to restructure who you are. And so the importance of this is not to make it too long is You need to really understand who you are. Then you need to understand it's important to be able to forget who you are and learn what's going on around you and how to fit into that. And I think that's a psychological lesson that some people miss because they're not ever asked to step outside of themselves and be a part of a group. And so they always have a bit of a selfish mindset. And it's hard for them to integrate or communicate with different people.
So there's definitely two types of problems that manifest here, at least. You already mentioned one, which is the inability to give of yourself or to sacrifice of yourself for the group. And so there's a constant boundary between yourself and other people. And as we've spoken about before, humans are deeply social creatures. Unless you're going to live off the grid, away from everyone somehow in the woods somewhere, you have to be able to integrate into society. There's another problem which could be thought of as the opposite extreme, which is where you lose yourself in the crowd and you lose yourself in society. I saw this a lot in the Marine Corps, where I'm hanging out at bars, I'm hanging out with my fraternity brothers who are also in the military, and we're just watching some guys who we know are about to transition out of the military. And so they've been remolded and in some ways crushed down to fit into this social organization, so much so where they've lost themselves, and their main source of meaning is the social organization, is to be a Marine. Their identity is narrowly to be a Marine. And when it comes time for them to transition back out into the broader society, they are lost and they have to go through another initiation process. But many times that exit initiation process is not as flushed out and differentiated and supported, let's say, compared to coming into the military. And so those are definitely two problems to be mindful of.
Yeah, I mean, it's always realizing that you could get too into any group that you're a part of. Like you should still have enough identity for self. Like it's something that I talk about with my LB a lot. Like the things that you do should amplify who you already are. You know what I'm saying? They shouldn't take control of who you are so that you no longer have an idea of self or even have any value outside of the organization. Like you should be able to still be valuable to the rest of the world too. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I think sometimes we forget that. And like you said, a lot of these organizations don't really provide that. I guess you would call it an offboarding flow. Like they don't really provide the lifestyle afterwards. Even if you think about like this is a perfect example is like the streets. If you go and you decide to sell drugs, be a gang member, and you get locked up, and you do a certain amount of time, and everybody in your circle by the time you get out is dead or in jail, and you have no social structure to go back to once you get out, the society doesn't really integrate well. You know what I'm saying? Like, especially if you have a Fed charge or something, and now you can't just go get a job and get into that. It's like, where do I fit? And I think that's a bigger like social cultural issue, and I mean like a world issue. Like, how do we integrate those people that are lost and back into society? Whether you're ex-military or ex-con, whether you're ex-gang member, or even if you're just an ex-addict, or even if you were just used to be rich and now you're trying to get back into like like you're rich and now you're poor and you have to figure out how to get along in that society where you've had your nose up at it or you were never a part of it. It's hard to integrate back into social structures if you separated yourself from it in a way that's not logical.
I think part of the solution is, again, what we've been talking about this whole time, is helping our culture, our society adopt a unified value hierarchy, which is the same thing as saying that we should adopt an archetypal unified story. So that way, no matter where you're at, there's a source of purpose and a source of meaning. There's the attempt to adhere to that story, whatever it is, and going on the hero's journey of trying to connect yourself to that broader story. And so you could imagine, just as an example, if the Judeo-Christian archetypal stories were the basic constituents of our unified value hierarchy, where at first it's God, right? There's you and there's God, and you're trying to figure out how to make that bridge, right? Well, if everybody understood that we're trying to make that bridge, then we share in a set of expectations and beliefs that reduce the amount of conflict that we have to engage in. And when it comes to a value hierarchy, a good value hierarchy makes room for diverse ways of accomplishing higher and higher goals. And so, just for an example, if my highest value is to be fit, well, there's multiple ways to be fit. I can be a marathon runner, I can be a bodybuilder, I can do martial arts, I can do it, be a dancer. There's multiple ways to do it, but they're all converging on the same higher order goal. And then you take that goal, to be fit, and you also say, well, I want to be a good dad, I want to be a good citizen, and so on and so forth. You could see how hierarchies work. So I don't want to come off as saying that the requirement for a unified framework means that everyone has to do the same thing and it has to be rigid. No, but we do have to orient towards some transcendent goal if we all want to be on some level of the same page.
Yeah, I agree with that. I forgot where I heard this at, but I heard somebody say that in order for society to get to the point that we want to see it at, we have to teach people how to set righteous goals. Goals that are ambiguous enough for them to give joy to the person, but also targeted enough for them to be useful for the whole as well. And so this idea of like service to others over service to self, but still valuing service to self at a certain point. And so I think the balance was what they said, a 51% service to others and a 49% service to self is supposed to be the ideal balance for a positive reality. And if we could get most people into that framework, that would be where society kind of balances out. And like you said, it's not an aspect of saying that we need to erase identity in order for that to happen. But we need to have the same, like you said, goal hierarchy set up. And if it's ambiguous enough and not tied to one particular culture or religious ideals, we could be able to set up something that could encompass everybody's ideas and ideals without leaving anybody out, but it's still broad enough. So like that's why I'm so big on like we need a human religion. Like what's the human thing? Like it's okay to have your culture outside of that, but what do we as humans agree is the framework? You know what I'm saying? And how does what's even that's something that I would like to be like if we could build the human hierarchy of needs and kind of just set out what that is and start initiating people into that. That's something that I think is useful in the world nowadays because the longer, if we can build a framework that's true, that's timeless, who cares how long it takes for people to catch on? If we put it in a book and we put it out there and I spend the rest of my life pushing it, I feel like I did my job. Especially if it's something like you said that's in truth, that's not going to fade with time. Those are the things I search for, like as far as big goals, because that's something that we could really say, like, hey, like this is it. It's not a solution, but it's a step in the right direction, you know?
What I'm about to say, I think, can be used to respond to multiple things you said there. I am trying to figure out what my 5-year dissertation will be for this PhD program. I'm trying to figure out what's a good question that is not something that I just know I can do and figure out, and I can write up the paper, do some experiments, and then get the degree, right? I want to answer a big question. And what you spoke about is definitely in the domain of where my mind goes in terms of what's the best goal hierarchy that provides the maximum meaning for the individual, for the long term, and for as many people as possible around the individual.
You know?
Yeah, it's
Like what
yeah,
does that look like? What does that framework look like? What is it? If they say somebody that's enlightened can technically turn a light bulb on 10,000 individuals in their circle? What does that energy flow look like? What do those habits look like? what does the conversation with an individual in that framework look like? And how can we teach people to live in that framework so much so that they inspire others to? And how fast does it spread once we get the right combination of principles? Like, there's a reason why Jesus is such a compelling character. There's a reason why Buddha and Gandhi are the compelling characters that they are. Even when we look at things like nowadays, you think about people like a Gary Vee, or even Obama in his wave and how he was able to move. There's an aspect of charisma that can be embodied. There's a certain amount of principles that a majority of people will agree to. And if we can pencil into that and see what the frequency is and kind of start riding that pendulum until we get the right mixture, there's something there for humanity if somebody continues to focus on it.
And like you mentioned before, with the desire for, I believe you called it a world religion or a human race religion, I believe that the answer to the questions we're discussing here are in a study of world religions and a history of religious ideas and world literature. I am currently reading The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. It's a Russian novel, came out in 1880, and many people have argued that it's the greatest work of literature in the 19th century. And there's so many values in there. There's so many gems and principles in the book. And it's interesting because it's a sequence of stories. It's one 700-page novel, but it's a hierarchy of stories, which I'm sure you would understand from watching anime or your own reading. Many great works of literature and art are exactly like that. They're hierarchies of stories where there's so much complexity going on, but at the end they come to a point. And okay, but just as an example, I just finished this scene where one of the main characters, his name is Alyosha. He's a monastic novitiate, and so he was a monk, a religious monk for a few years, and he's the Christ-like character in the story. He has an older brother who is more intellectual than he is. He's more articulate, more rational. He's also an atheist. And so his older brother, Ivan, can make all of these arguments against God and against religion. And Alyosha can't combat it verbally. But what Alyosha does is he's just a better person. He just acts better. And so there's this scene where I won't go too much into it, but there's a scene where this family is falling apart and these kids were bullying this one kid, and the one kid starts to die of a sickness, and it's just a lot of bad things that are going on. And you see how Alyosha inserts himself in these family dynamics and is able to reconcile and bring things together. And while there are still tragic events occurring, people are, like you mentioned, Alyosha is able to find the light in all of these individuals and to help them see that they can enlighten, to use that term, other people as well. And so he's spreading love. And while the author of the book isn't explicitly saying that's the good way to act, you see it as you're reading the text and you're like, man, that Alyosha guy, man, he is something. And so I do think that it can be crucial to study world religions and world literature. I think it can be so helpful.
Yeah, I mean, like we always say, is I'm always big on calling what I'm the term I'm gonna call circling the square. I don't know if people are already saying that, if I got it from somewhere, but it's a term that stuck with me because it's this idea that, like, you need to see it from all angles. And then you need to make sure you have the whole thing. Like, you need to see all the angles, so that's the square. But you also need a 360-degree view of it. Like, you need to see everything. And it takes time for that. And you ain't got time to go travel the world and see it all yourself. You gotta take somebody else's experiences for at some type of value. You don't have to believe everything that everybody says, but there is information, and your ability to. That's why I think reading comprehension is such a skill that's been slept on in society, because it's like you should be able to read something and understand what's going on and the mood and the tone of it and some of the undertones and lessons that are in the story. Like you said, there are a lot of people that read stories and don't get who the good or the bad characters are. Like, they're not able to track what's going on and really pull something from it. Like, I've been reading the Kabbalion again, and just going through that is interesting. Like, going through, like, understanding the law of rhythm and things like that. Like that going back, the raw rhythm is literally the pendulum swing, and then understanding the law of vibration, everything is in motion. The law of correspondence, the as above, so below. There's so many keys in there that just start giving you this way of looking at the world in a way that's valuable.
It's hard, man, but it's fun. I think that's the fun part of it as well. And we kind of strayed a little bit off the topic, but this is fine. I think we're in this constant dialogue with ourselves, but also throughout society about what are the proper goals that we should adopt, and then what are the rituals and initiations that we should establish to help teach people about those goals. You know, I just think of another example of, let's say I want to imagine a kid trying to join the high school basketball team. I have zero experience with this, so this might sound completely off, but I'm imagining, my brother played a little bit, so I'm imagining that there are some preconditions to being able to join that team, to being able to join that social organization. No matter how small, the pattern that we're talking about is fractal, right? And so you have to be willing to make a sacrifice. First of all, you can't be a ball hog. You have to be a team player. You have to have some level of skill in the game. You have to be able to learn how to speak that specific team's language. Everything we've just spoken about. And we're just doing that constantly, nonstop, all the time, right? What are the correct goals? What are the rituals and initiations which help bind our expectations? And what are the rituals that we can help people go through so that way they can prove themselves as, for lack of better terms, worthy to join our social organization and help us move towards our goal. And we're doing that in the corporate world. We're doing that in sports, like we said, the military, civic organizations like fraternities, churches. You know, I'm sure there are churches who are still arguing about the proper way to conduct a sermon. And I think that's to the degree that our lives as humans are better now than 100 years ago. We seem to be making progress in the right direction, but it's been a constant dialogue, I guess, across people, maybe forever, man. I don't know. Maybe forever. Even before we could speak, what were we doing? We were watching other people, let's say, hunt, for example. We were watching good and bad hunters, and we would imitate the better hunters because we would see the outcomes of their actions, and we would try to, right, and then as we all kept imitating the same thing, well, then you could imagine, and I'm speculating here completely, but you could, what if it's the case that as we collectively generated an image of what a good hunter is, we then ritualized that image and helped teach our children about what it is to be a
And
good hunter.
deified
And okay, yep, exactly.
it. We deified it. I mean, think about Artemis, the god of like there's there's a gods in every culture that are masters of a craft that's necessary for our survival. Why are these gods there? Because at some point we realize that there's a set of skills and an archetype that's responsible for that thing. There's a way of human understanding. There's a thought pattern. So this is my way. So when I think about angels, I think about gods. I think that they're personified thought patterns. If you think in this way and you do these things and you have these patterns, these are the things that humanity has identified as the qualities that would be necessary for you to be good at these things. So for you to be a god of hunting, you should have these characteristics. These characteristics build out the egregor or the deity that is whatever we think about in the pantheon of gods. Even if you think about people that just like like north, east, south, and west in some cultures have personality traits like their deities. You know what I'm saying? Summer, spring, fall, winter. They have personality traits. They're deified. They have their own way of being in a sense. Even with this, with the initiations, I came up with a framework for like I got into like triple og. So I was having a conversation with somebody and we were talking about how people that get into psychedelics usually have similar experiences early on. A lot of people talk about seeing Anubis or some type of dark mother or spider trying to, or something trying to grab them out of the darkness. And when you go and start reading triple R's and you have an understanding of it, you start realizing that there's a connection to psychedelic or visual or spiritual experiences to the stories that society has chosen to tell over time. And so whether you talk about shamans or priests, whether you talk about interactions with angels or you talk about interactions with nature spirits, the underlying framework tends to be the same. So like even with I came up with this where it's like Ganesha is considered a door opener. And things like Anubis is considered like judgment of the heart. So he's tied to new death experiences. Then you have like a Nancy, the spider, which is a trickster, or even if you think about um, Papa Legba, who is also like the crossroad deity, who make where you think about choices and going one way or another, and then you think about the Nagas, which are connected to the Naga Loka or wisdom or subconscious knowledge. There's these entities that, as you get into like, so I brought that up because those processes are tied. The early psychedelics are considered initiatory processes into the shamanic space. So there's a log of these things and the beings that are supposed to be there. And shamans teach that you should meet these beings and have blessings from these certain beings along the way. And these are just subconscious principles within the mind, the subconscious mind of people. So like not to make it too complicated, what I'm saying is that the archetypal things that we see as gods and principles in people are usually a part of this initiatory process, and they're really just different archetypal aspects of your mind that you run into in these different situations, and understanding or having a frame of reference for either the being or for the process makes life easier. I said a lot there, so
I can no, you're good. I feel like the at least one theme I can pick up on is the tendency of human beings to deify or personify what might otherwise be considered an objective process, where for example the hero being the sun, the moon being, well, in some cases the moon is also a hero, but the idea that the sun setting is the hero being swallowed by a dragon and then fighting through hell throughout the night and then rising again. And I don't exactly know why we do that, but it is interesting that that's a way that the mind works. But it also gives, I think, credence to something we've been saying all along, is the idea that we see the world through a story. We think in stories, and so it isn't. It's hard to overestimate the significance of the question of what should be the unifying story that orients the human race.
I think something that's important for what you're saying is understanding things like this. So like if we look at the story of the sun and the moon and the sun going through the underworld, okay, so if we talk about the law of correspondence as above, so below, that story about the sun and the moon and the earth is also telling you something about yourselves. So you can take that story about a bigger thing, and once you understand how that bigger thing correlates to the smaller thing, that story becomes a translator to the function of that thing. And it's very subtle when you look at it, but when you start really getting into metaphysics and starting studying different things, I'm trying to think of a good example of it, but like even if you think about how when you eat food, technically you're devouring the sun because your point of eating food is to get the sunlight energy that that thing is holding. When you eat meat, like that's why plants give you the best food because plants directly photosynthesis, sunlight, whoop, 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 they're the best source of sunlight energy. And so when you eat animals that eat plants, they give you that you're still only getting the sunlight energy. That's why you get less energy from meat than you get from plants. And this is the whole thing here. And the idea of your body naturally being able to absorb sunlight from sitting in the sun and being in the sun. And these are the three levels of your body eating the sunlight. And then it goes through this process. So technically the inner world of your body or the subterranean realm of your body is considered hell, right? So like the bowels and the things that your body goes through in your body is your lower chakras. These are your lower realms. So when you think about yourself as a reflection of the cosmos, you go through these same cycles. and allowing yourself to use these studies and these stories in a way to play with these concepts and ground in more understanding, I think is very valuable.
Man, you're killing it in this. You're saying a lot, man. What was coming to my mind? It might shift us a little bit, but going back to rituals, and then I'm leaning more towards, let's say, contemporary culture. Why do we have rituals when we greet people? You know, why are there norms and expectations where if someone deviates from that ritual, you're like, whoa. Well, that's kind of strange. When we allow people to come into our home, there's a norm for it, and it's also so interesting because these rituals, hopefully, we've been alluding to this as well throughout the conversation. They aren't necessarily rigid. They can be modified, and they're somewhat flexible, and as new friend groups and social organizations form, new rituals form. But I guess one thing I would just call people to attend to is I would encourage people to, I guess, respect rituals. You know, we haven't defined it too well, I think, throughout this conversation, but maybe that's fine. A ritual is, we've alluded to it being a signal or a symbolic representation of what translating planes of meaning. That's one thing. Okay, that sounds super woo woo, but it's also just coming home from work, right? It's like you're one way at work, and you have this mindset, these attitudes, this language that you speak, these patterns of perception and action, and things have a certain meaning when you're in work mode, and then they have a different meaning when you're at home. And I don't know if you have this experience, but I like to try to keep things separated. And I like to make sure that my work phone is somewhere else where it can't get to me when I'm at home. And if that does happen, it's as if there's a breach. It's as if there's something that's getting conflated. And so, not to try to make it again too abstract and symbolic, but it can be helpful to establish not only good habits but good rituals for your life, for your life and your partner's life, jointly, for your family, and so on and so forth. So that way we can more easily canalize our meaning and the different modes of engaging with meaning in life.
I think the way I like to phrase it is like this. I tell my girl often. So let's say back to the main conversation idea initiation and ritual. So to me, initiation, like I said, is you coming into a new story and a new idea, and then the rituals are the habits that you pick up to substantiate that idea in your lifestyle. So rituals are your intention setting throughout your day to day. I commit to doing these certain rituals however often I do them because I believe and initiated into this set of thinking. So it's like idea of like being a Christian. If I went and got baptized and I joined the church, I go to church every Sunday as a ritual in order to show my commitment to this lifestyle. I take communion and I do that ritual every so often as a commitment to that lifestyle. I pay tithes as a commitment to that lifestyle. That's all, these are rituals as a part of the Christian faith. You see what I'm saying? And so these rituals are a part of the rituals are the actions that show your commitment to the thing that you've initiated yourself into. Like you said, even with friendships or coming home, if you and your friends say that, hey, we get on the phone, or we get on Discord, or we hop on the game at this time, that's a ritual that you've agreed to as a part of that social circle that you're in. Just like the witches that meet at night in the coven, that's their ritual. That's their ritualistic time. We meet at this time and we do this. This is a ritual. And so I think sometimes we've made like this idea of cult shit. Like it's like, oh, this is cult shit. Well, yeah, culture has rituals. Whatever culture or social group you're a part of, because social groups are just small mini cultures. Cultures are the way that we know it are just overarching things. You have many cultures or many cliques or gangs. These are the same thing. We're just looking at different ways of dividing up this understanding that's just saying, hey, when I agree to hang out with this group of people, these are the things that we do to, like I said, substantiate or keep going this thing. These are the habits that we've agreed to that bind this into reality. It's this idea of like certain gods, like hey, if you didn't pray to this guy, like if you don't know if American gods, the book, if nobody was praying to them, they didn't have any power. So if you're not feeding this thing, then it dissipates. That's the principle here.
I think binding is such a key word that we've been using throughout the conversation. Okay, there's multiple things I want to throw out on the table. Okay. Rituals and their use are not only socially constructed. You could say they're partially socially constructed, but to the degree that they are embodied in action, that's where I stop thinking that they are socially constructed. It's strange. You can even imagine that animals have rituals. If you watch how dogs act, and I love dogs. I feel like we can learn so much from them. But when they meet one another, they do the same thing over and over again. Sniff each other's butt. Like it's like it's
a ritual.
And I don't think they had this organized discussion where we're like, okay, you have to do it for this long, and if you do it longer, you're not part of us. You're a cat.
There's a certain way to do it.
Right, but it's something that's implicit that seems to have been built up for God knows how long over the course of just millions of interactions, and dogs can, to some degree, I think. No, I don't want to say that. That's too much speculation. But yeah, dogs have habits, and what the difference between a habit and a ritual, I think, is one of degree and not necessarily kind. And I guess one reason I'm highlighting that is to just also emphasize the perhaps biological grounding for various rituals as well. Even if it's not specific rituals, it's the idea of having a ritual itself. The same way that you can argue the biological underpinning for language, although not necessarily the specific languages. Like we all have a language instinct, I'm pretty sure. Everyone has the capacity for all humans have the capacity for language, but the specific language that is utilized and learned, that's definitely culturally predicated. So that's one part. I also then wanted to talk about how I feel like our culture thinks that we can get rid of rituals and initiations and just keep the explicit component of what it is to be part of a social organization, if that makes sense. Like maybe what's an example? I feel like when we lose the ability to understand what rituals are for, even implicitly, and on top of that, we've become more rational. We identify more with our ego and our intellect and our material power over the world, and we think we don't need the spiritual world, the sacred. Again, going back to Mircea Eliade, we're falling more into the profane world and losing the sense of the sacred. Although I don't think we're losing the same sense of the sacred. I think it's just manifesting in negative ways. People are speaking about a meaning crisis. It's like, well, why do so many people feel like they lack meaning? It's because there's a component of their personality that is lacking sacred grounding. I don't think you can get rid of it. But yeah, so just curious about your thoughts on the idea. I don't know if you've noticed this, if you agree with it, or if you have observed that maybe there are some elements of our culture that are trying to get rid of the idea of ritual and initiation and symbols and their functional utility in binding us towards meaning.
Yeah, I mean, so if you don't believe in anything, you'll fall. If you don't believe in something, you'll fall for anything. That's my favorite quote, because I believe that you need to be grounded in something to be able to tell where you're going. Like you have to have some ground to stand on to look at anything. Like you need a frame of reference. That's why having an ego is necessary. Like you need to identify in some form or fashion to look outward. And so But I also believe that you can be overly attached to your ego and not be able to look outside of it as well. And what I'm saying is that I believe that society is getting to the point where there's two things going on at the same time. One, there's no conjoined agreement on what we believe. Nobody is picking a side anymore. Like there used to be, like everybody was on the Christian thing. We could all agree that Jesus was pretty cool and we liked the story, and that's what's going on. And most people still do. But the idea that God is going to protect us from bad things happening has kind of faded with the state of the world. The world is in too much of a chaotic state for people to have firm faith. I think that's what I'm trying to say. It's interesting because I talk to a lot of people that see the state of the world and don't believe that God could be responsible for it almost. It's almost like we've lost that idea of believing that it can be ordered. And even if people don't believe in God, the people that didn't believe in God have faith in the government. And so church and state is the balance here that we usually have. If people don't believe in the church, they usually believe in the government. Right now, most people don't believe in the government and they don't believe in the church. So without any ground to stand on, most people are just like, you know what? Fuck it. We're gonna like that's the general consensus here. And I think what we're looking for, and what I think is literally what's we're kind of communicating about, is humanity is now searching for ground. Like, what is going to be the thing that we can unite under that's going to get us in the right direction? And until we find that, we're going to be a bit lost. And I don't know if it's a religion, if it's just a mindset, if it's a principle that we all agree on. I believe it's going to take something pretty bad to happen for us to see what the good part of humanity is. The truth is that the self work is about finding and seeing your divinity. And we're living in a world where it's harder to do that, um, because there's so much comparison going on and there's so much simulated pain. Now, I'm not saying that what people are going through isn't hard and that is not tough, but in the grand scheme of things, most of the suffering we experience is man-made. There's men making choices that are limiting the ability and our access to things that could make life easier for most people. And because of that, there's a bit of an illusionary thing that we can't get out of this or that there's no hope. And so for me, hope and faith play a big part in the social climate that we're seeing. People just don't have anything to hold on to. Most adults are trying to figure it out. Most kids don't know what to believe in or which way to go. So I was having this conversation before. If you really look at the world right now, what is there to believe in if you don't have your own idea of faith or understanding? Like socially, there's nothing that we are all agreeing on.
Yeah, there's this author, philosopher. His name was Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and he famously wrote this book called The Gulag Archipelago. And so he was a prisoner in the concentration camps in the Soviet Union in the 20th century. And the Gulag Archipelago just details out his experiences there. And one of the things that he attributes the rise of communism to is a lack of God. Let's say that, a lack of faith. And one of the things that he echoed, which is an idea from Dostoevsky, the author that I mentioned earlier, is this idea that beauty will save the world. And I heard this idea the other day that it's from a cognitive scientist, John Vervaeke. He said that you might be able to think of beauty as truth revealed. And that has stuck with me because I never really understood what beauty was. And I obviously still don't. I still think that it's something relatively inexhaustible that you can continue to engage with. But that phrasing clicked for me. It's been useful to meditate on this idea that something is beautiful when it reveals more of reality to you and therefore more truth to you than you had before. Go for it.
So remember the point I made about the Venus conversation, how Venus was the goddess of beauty, and that how they identified Venus or correlated Venus with the phi ratio, and that the phi ratio is something that's identified in all things. So the truth is identified in all things via beauty directly. And so this is where I like the metaphysics, is because we don't have to think about how this works. Like, no, it's there in the language if you don't underthink it or overthink it. If Venus is the goddess of beauty, how is beauty, if beauty and truth are synonymous? Okay, well, beauty is the idea of the woman, the feminine, the beauty, the flowers, the floral, spring, that's beauty. We see beauty in springtime. We see it manifest from winter. So we see death. We see life come from death in the springtime. That's our idea of beauty. And then that flower is also synonymous, or it grows in this phi ratio that is identified in all things. So all things are beautiful based off of this ratio. So the truth in all things is the ratio of phi connected to beauty. And so we identify it in that way. You see, so that for me, that's how I break that down. Like it's that's about how we can understand the world. It's like, okay, these things are simple. So if that thing is true, if phi is in all things, and that the phi is the truth, and that design means that we're divinely designed. We're divine. We're designed in a thing. We're designed by the heavens. There's a sign in the heavens that matches our physical design. So we're divinely designed because that's orchestrated divine. We don't. Nothing controls that pattern. To me, that's how that works. How are we divine? Yeah, because we're divine. We're reflections of divine patterns. Our structure itself is built mathematically divinely.
I'm with it. I'm with it. I yeah, obviously a lot of your metaphysical knowledge, I have to stick with it for a little bit and think about it. But to the degree that I understand it in spirit, I'm totally here for it. I feel like you just said what I just said.
It's
Some
just a
degree.
different language. You know what I'm saying? And so it's just understanding that these things have been communicated in multiple different cultures. And our ability to talk to different people. This is why I love my pops, bro. I could bring my dad anything from metaphysics, and he's gonna be like, here's the Bible verse, here's what it means, here's what I think. Take it or leave it. He's not moving. And some people just aren't moving, but they have such a depth of knowledge because they've talked to people. My dad sits and talks to whatever religion, whatever. This is what I believe. What your book say? This is what my book say. We can go back and forward. I'm gonna learn what I learn. Either you like me or you don't. I'm not changing what I believe, but there's a comparison of knowledge that I feel like we both can gain from. That's why I have the mindset I have about religion and things. Because I watch my pops like let the Jehovah's Witnesses come in and sit and talk with them for an hour or two, and then send them about their way. Like, oh, they crazy, man. I don't know what they talking about. But this is what I believe, and it's just that, and it's not really like an arrogance, or it's being able to comparatively improve yourself. You know what I'm saying? And then just realizing that there's so many ways of looking at it, and we can continue to grow if we make those touch points and see that, oh, this is saying the same thing, so there's truth there.
Yeah, and then this will be my last point before we wrap up. This idea that beauty is truth revealed and that there is truth and beauty in all things. I think that's part of the solution to the lack of meaning and purpose that we were discussing earlier.
Definitely.
And I think that the religious grounding in the sacred that at least Western culture had over 150 years ago did was remind us of that, even implicitly, perhaps. But now we can still get there as we are discussing it explicitly. We can have seminars like the ones I mentioned where I heard the idea that beauty is truth revealed, and we can use this technology for good. It's so that was a YouTube video that I stumbled upon, and I was like, wow, this might change my world. Like this might change my life trajectory. This idea, it's really amazing, and I believe he got it from Plato. And so again, to your point, these ideas are there, and this conversation has been going on for thousands of years. But to try to give a pragmatic comment, and this is obviously easier said than done, but to the degree that people are lacking meaning and purpose, it can be helpful to look right where you're at for it. Many people try to seek meaning and purpose, I don't know, in the new job, in the when I make it to the next tax bracket, or when I finally get this ideal perfect girlfriend or whatever it is. And that's not to demean those goals. Goals are fine, right? But it's, if you're starting from zero, how about let's say that if you're starting from a place where you feel like you have no meaning or no purpose, you can look around you at things that you feel like are not going so well or could be better immediately. When I say around you, I mean in your social realm, in your psyche, or in your room. You know, Jordan Peterson famously talks about cleaning your room and cleaning your bed, and just starting somewhere, right? We mentioned that value hierarchy, that hierarchy of goals that we had before, where God's at the top. At the bottom of that hierarchy is where all of the abstract notions we've been discussing ground out into action. And so you have to start somewhere, you know? Um, so yeah, if you feel like you're lacking in purpose and meaning, try paying attention to the stuff around you. It's my
Definitely.
time. Yeah.
I'm gonna close it out, and I'm gonna build upon your closing point with this. Realize that if you don't feel a part of where you are, it's because you're probably not properly initiated into your environment. That's the big point of what we're saying here, is that you need to figure out what initiation into your environment means. Have you learned the language? A lot of people, I have this conversation with a lot of people, and this is a whole other point that we may get into another day, is a lot of people don't feel loved at home because they don't understand the love language their family speaks. And because you value someone else's love language more than the one that you have at home, you feel like you're not loved. That's the thing. Like, you can miss the love in your environment because it doesn't show up the way that you want it to, because you're not initiated to how love works in that space, and you only see love in a different space. And so I think the big thing is here is figuring out how to be initiated into where you are, and then figure out where you want to go next. Because if you're not initiated into where you are and you don't understand the rules of your current social circle, you'll never be able to navigate it. And yeah, that could push you into going into the social circle you need to, but you don't always have the option to move. And sometimes if you're not initiated in the space you're in, you'll always have that feel of dissociation from your environment. So my thing for closing would be, get initiated into where you are before you try to move somewhere else. You need to know where your current space is, what the rules of the land are, what people expect and don't expect, and what your social positioning is in that space. And they may not like it, but accepting it teaches you how to navigate it. And when you can navigate it and you accept where you are, you can choose where you go next. And that's where your power lies.
Amazing. Dog. Another great conversation.
Definitely enjoyed it, dog. We'll take some notes and figure out what we want to get on to next. And make sure y'all join the next show. Tell people about it if you watch. And peace out, family. Y'all have a good day.
All right. Have a good one.